Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Carter DeLoro. I'm from New York City. I went to Pomona College for undergrad, and I worked in admissions at Pomona and Occidental. I've been a school-based counselor across New England and the Midwest, and I'm currently the co-director of college counseling at the Marymount School of New York.
I'm Mark Stucker, and I'm the founder and producer. Our mission is to make college knowledge available to all. We care deeply about your kid. We believe college is a match to be made and not a prize to be won. We believe in being genuine and transparent. We are committed to covering a variety of topics, including the tough subjects. Thanks to your generosity, we're committed to providing a minimum of 10 hours of fresh, commercial-free content every month, with episodes every Monday and Thursday. We have a variety of co-hosts because we believe and value diverse perspectives. You're our listening family, and we get great joy every time we meet with you as we do our best to give you tools so your students can soar and reach their limitless potential. Good morning, friends. I am stoked today. I'm excited. Friends, you want to know what gets me really stoked, gets me jazzed, gets me pumped, gets me on fire? It's when we have really good content, or at least I think it's good content. And the kind of content that I tend to like is content that I think a lot of people might not know, or something new, or if we did maybe a really deep dive in an area that I don't see anywhere else, it just gets me fired up. And there's a lot of things I feel that happened both in this episode and announcements. So let me start out by giving you a couple of updates about some of the things that have me in the clouds. So tomorrow I'm doing an interview with Roshan Fernandez. Now, I have a nice Wall Street Journal writer, and he writes a lot on college admissions. He's written some really great articles, many that you've read. And I haven't really interviewed a reporter for a while. I mean, had Jeffrey Salingo and Ron Lieber on. Those are my last two reporters, and that's, I don't know, a year and a half ago at least. So it's been a while since I've had a reporter, and Roshan has written a lot of really good articles recently. I mean, he's the one who wrote the article, his name's the only one on the byline on the fraud squad is going to catch you at Caltech if you're lying. That's him. He's also written several articles on Harvard, Harvard cracking down on grade inflation. He's written an article on all the different things colleges do to protect their yield and others as well. So I think you're going to enjoy that one. I haven't decided yet if that's going to be over here or YouTube, but I'm recording it tomorrow. So I'm excited about that. Other thing I'm very excited about. So I have to tell you this story. So I did a fly-in to a group of schools known as the Northwest Five. I did this in 2022. So there are schools in Oregon and Washington. And one of the schools on that trip was Whitman College in Walla Walla, Washington. Now, I can't remember all the details, but some of it's really vague and some of it's really crystal clear. So when I'm at Whitman, they gave us a choice to do something, and I don't remember what it was, but I chose not to do it. And the other option was to stay behind. Now, I stayed behind. Now, what that meant was I had about a 45-minute conversation with Adam Miller, who's the chief enrollment officer at Whitman. And we really went deep into talking about money. At the time, Ron Lieber had really come out from the New York Times and had really elevated College of Worcester and Whitman because of what they're doing with financial transparency and doing a full tax review for people, even if they didn't apply, which is going way, way, way beyond a net price calculator. So I know we were talking a lot about that. We got really in the weeds. At the end, he was like, this is fun for me. I don't know if you have these kind of in-depth conversations. And you know me, I'm a geek for this stuff. So I left that saying, I've got to have Adam Miller on the podcast. This is 2022. Well, last week, somebody like in media at Whitman reached out to me and said, I think Adam Miller would be a great guest for your podcast. So I'm like, oh my goodness, this is perfect. So set up our pre-meeting, which was last night, and we talked for a long time. And I'm telling you, Adam's coming on. I'm excited about him coming on. I think you're going to really like it. We're not going to talk about Whitman. We're going to talk about this brand new 10% plan they've rolled out that nobody's doing anything like this. All right. I don't want to give away all the juice right now, but they're doing something that hits three things that I think is going to resonate in the marketplace in a major way, which is transparency, affordability, and simplicity. It's the new 10% plan. So big New York Times article was written on it not that long ago. Christina's actually quoted in that article. Ron Lieber did that. I'm excited to have him on. I think you guys are going to love it. And I'm also going to do something with Adam that I haven't done in a while. Our longtime listeners will remember that I used to have our thought leaders on, and then I would do a webinar later. And I did that maybe 4 or 5 times. Well, I'm doing that with Adam. We've already agreed, committed to do it. So after the interview, to be about an hour and 15-minute interview, then we're going to have another date for people to come on, sign up. It'll all be up on our website. And you can just ask Adam the questions about their new 10% plan. Every time we do these, we get tons of college counselors that want to come and learn about it. And we get a nice chunk of parents. So just give you a preview. Those are a couple of things that have me stoked. But there are many, many other things as well. So I have to talk about our events coming up because we've never had this many events in such a short period of time. Yeah, we've got actually 6 events, but 5 of them are up on our website with dates. So our October 6th event in Minneapolis, that is really shaping up to be a great event. So a couple things happened this week for that event. And once again, just go to yourcollegemindkid.com, hit the events page, sign up for the October 6th event right in Minneapolis. So a couple things happened this week. I was talking to Anthony Berry, who's the director of admission at Trinity College in Hartford. And we had already actually made plans to get together in that week anyway. And I told him about the event, and he's like, I'm in. So you're going to have Anthony Berry there, director of admissions at Trinity. Andy Strickler, I think I shared with you this last week, so I'm not going to go into too much on this, but I did 2 one-hour interviews with Andy Strickler for YouTube. I can't wait for you guys to hear those. But, I said, Andy, just making sure you're confirmed for our October 6th event. He literally changed his plans. He said, I'm literally coming because of that. I want to meet our listeners. So that's what he thinks of you guys. And then, when I got to talk with Adam Miller last night, I'm like, yeah, let's do this. And let's do the podcast. And yeah, let's do the follow-up. And then I'm like, Adam, are you going to be at NACAC, National Association of College Admissions, our big annual conference? And he's like, I'm going to be there, of course. When are you coming in? I'm coming in the 7th. I'm like, oh, snap. I would have loved for you to have attended our Minneapolis reception. And then Adam's like, on the 6th, it's the night before. He said, well, I can change my ticket. Put me down. So you're going to have heavyweights. Susan Tree will be there. And there's others there too. I'm not even mentioning everybody. But if you don't live too far from Minneapolis, you probably want to take that trip and attend that October 6th event. So that reception is set up. Very stoked. Then we've never done anything before in Wisconsin. And we're doing 2 things in Wisconsin. On the 11th, we're doing a gathering, in just outside of Madison, at one of the leading schools, in the state of Wisconsin is hosting. And it's going to be our traditional meet and greet, refreshments, Q&A. Like, these are a lot of fun. And so if you're a Wisconsin listener, we'd love to have you come there. And then we just added that same evening, we've added a dinner in Milwaukee and a restaurant. And so, 5 to 6:30, that event's up. You want to come, everybody's pays for themselves. And we just kind of meet as a group of listeners. I've done a couple of these before. They're a lot of fun. So that's on the agenda. You can sign up for that. We'd love to have you sign up and see you there. Space is very limited on that, so I would not procrastinate on that one. Milwaukee, October 11th. Then October 12th, we've got an event in Chicago, right off Lakeshore Drive. Sign up for that. That should be really fun. We have so many listeners in Illinois. I was talking to a school that's coming on the podcast here not that long ago. It was Miami, University in Ohio. And they committed to come on. And I was like, are you familiar with your podcast? And she said, Well, a lot of our Chicago families mention your podcast when they visit. So that's what attracted me. So we do have a lot of listeners in the Chicagoland. So that is on the 11th, and then on the 12th, we're in the western suburbs in Hinsdale. We got an event there. All these are up on our events page, yourcollegeboundkid.com/events. I love meeting our listeners. We do also have a North Carolina event that's been committed to, but it's not up yet. That one's a little unique in that they're putting the offer out to their school attendees first. And then once we see how many commitments they get from the school attendees, I kind of will know how many we have for our listeners. But there's definitely going to be spots for our listeners for the Research Triangle event. And I'll have more details to come. That one is not up right now. But the Minnesota event on the 6th, the 2 Wisconsin events on the 11th, Madison, Milwaukee, and then the Chicago and the western suburbs. All of those are up. So please go to yourcollegeboundkid.com, sign up for those events on our event page. I'm pretty stoked and pretty excited about those. Counselor Connect. Yeah, we're going to talk about all things going on with the Common App. Changes. We'll be in big group. We'll break up into small groups. Also have a big announcement to make there. So we really hope if you're a member for Counselor Connect community, we'll see you Sunday at 8 o'clock Eastern. Let me let you know what's going on with YouTube videos for the week. I kind of feel like if I don't do that now, I'm never going to remember, and then I'll get into today's episode. So what I'd like to do is tell you the YouTube videos that will be up between now and my next Audible podcast, just quickly and as a reminder, in case you're finding that content over there valuable. So that will be, if I'm looking correctly at my dates, Friday the 21st, if you're hearing this on the Thursday, the 20th, Saturday 22nd, and Sunday the 23rd. So we have our frequently asked questions with Carter that will go live on Friday the 21st. And we're taking on this question. What essay topic should I avoid with my personal statement? What essay topic should I avoid? That's intentionally worded that way. So if you want to know what topics to avoid, you want to check that video out. Then Christina is up, also in our frequently asked question. And we're taking on this question. Do you really need to complete the FAFSA? Or do you need to complete it? What if you're not going to qualify for any financial aid? Do you need to complete it? So we're taking that question on. And then on the Sunday, Vince is joining me to answer the questions why college applications are exploding. Why are people applying way more applications now than they did before? So that's the content on YouTube for the week. All right, let's get to today's episode, which I'm so totally stoked about. I've told you guys before, we're doing a series of debates, and sometimes they're more spirited than others. So this one is between Carter and I, and we're looking at an article that Brennan Barnard wrote in Forbes. And Carter reached out to me and he said, I'd like to discuss this with you and take an opposing point of view. So I kind of read the article and I agreed with most of it. Carter had read it and he didn't agree with most of it. Now, there's things he agreed with and there's things I agreed with. So we're both very nuanced. So it makes for a good discussion. And, I try to keep the segments like around 20 minutes. You guys know that. I try to use my sixth sense if I think listeners will really enjoy something, if I feel like it's going to go longer. And that's what I did. I think listeners are really going to like this one. So this thing with Carter and I'm going to say it went about 43 minutes. So that's going to be a part 1 and a part 2. So you'll hear half of that today. And then the last thing I'm excited about today, and I've already sussed this out, this interview I did with Rick Barth, the director of admissions at Clemson. Now, let me tell you why this interview excites me so much. For one, I've never done a deep dive like this before where I talk so much about how a school makes decisions. We spent an hour on that topic, maybe an hour 5, just on how they make decisions. And I think you're going to like it. And if you don't, that's okay. I like trying new things. So that's exciting me. Let me tell you another reason why I'm stoked. A lot of you guys love Andy Strickler, and you like him because of his transparency, his authenticity, and just how much he just cares about kids. Well, I'll just tell you something. It's a lot harder for me to get transparency from public school leaders. And there's some good reasons for that. They don't always control the decisions the way that private school leaders do. If you want to hear a good interview of that, go back and look at my interview I did in 2019 with Greg Roberts. He's actually been the Chief Enrollment Officer at the University of Virginia since 2003, but before that, he was at Emory, and before that, he was at Georgetown. All right. So what we do in that interview is he talks about how much more freedom he had at private schools, Emory, Georgetown, than he does at UVA, and how things are dictated to him. So as a result of that, I've had some interviews, and I'm not going to mention names here, but I've had some interviews with some very, very senior people. Like I'm talking about the VP of enrollment, the chief enrollment officers for the entire office at public schools. And it has taken sometimes months and months and months to get approval. In fact, I remember someone who's one of the more renowned admission leaders in the country. And he reached out to me and he was like, Mark, I finally got a sign off to do the interview with you. And I'm thinking, you're the man and you need the sign off? Yeah, I mean, sometimes it has to go through the comms team and just number of people at the public schools. So, and then when you sometimes get a public school interview, and I can't take one stroke of the brush because they are very different. There's times you feel like you're the dentist trying to extract a tooth. I'm not going to mention a name, but I have someone in mind right now, one of the most nationally prominent admissions people who I've interviewed on this podcast. I couldn't get anything out of that person. Rick Barth is the most transparent public school interview I've ever done. And that's saying a lot because Rick Clark's pretty good. I had a funny story this week. Somebody said to me, you said at the end that Rick Barth from Clemson is coming on? I didn't know Rick Clark went to Clemson. So I said to myself, Norma Stucker, enunciate was ringing in my mind. No, it's not Rick Clark. It's Rick Barth. But yeah, he's just so open. And I think we all benefit, right? It helps us to make right decisions. So that's a long interview. You're going to hear it over the next 2 weeks, every Monday, Thursday. It literally goes almost an hour, 50 minutes. So anyway, without any further ado, let's get to our content. I'm sure you're tired of hearing about me. Let's hear the debate with Carter and me about the article with Brennan Barnard, maxing Forbes. If you have access to Forbes, you might want to check it out. It's August 1st if you want to read it first. All right, let's transition.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
Carter DeLauro is back. Hi, Carter.
Hi, Mark. How are you doing?
Good. I'm going to say something on the air that I said to you off the air. Really appreciate having you on here and the contributions you're making, and our listeners appreciate it. And I can tell you're having fun over there. And so I just wanted to thank you publicly.
Yeah, well, thank you for giving me the platform, sharing your platform with me to be able to dig into some of the ways that we can help students and families through this process.
Yeah, I haven't said this on the air, but Town and Country magazine ran an article on 11 college admissions podcasts that they feel are must listens. And they I don't know if they had a quote from you and Carter, but they signaled you out in there. Which was great. I was happy for that. Did your headmaster of your school, did anybody ever get word of that? That's good publicity.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything yet, but that's fine. I'm just, again, happy to contribute to that's such a great team of co-hosts and you that, are really focused on student health and wellness.
Love it. So we are doing something we haven't done in a while, which I'm very excited about. Well, we did it. I guess we did it a couple of weeks ago, but we've gotten away from, you remember, Carter, you've been listening since you first started. It's been a while. When did you think you started? 5-6 years ago? It was a while. At least. I think I've been a listener since before COVID. Yeah. Yeah. Before COVID. So 2018-19. So how every week we used to run a Hot Topics in the News. That was like a standard.
Yep.
Right. And so, but it's been a while. I recently did one in the last 10 days with Chris Tier on the Fraud Squad that Caltech is doing. And so we had that one, and we got another one today. And so Brennan Barnard, who has been on our podcast 3 times, worked with Susan and I at the Westtown School, and we've probably featured him 10 or 12 times, his articles on Forbes. He's a prolific writer for Forbes. So he's got an article that he wrote on August 1st, 2026, hot off the press. And I'm going to have Carter read and summarize it. And then we're just going to kind of have a discussion where we agree, where we disagree, and just interact with it. And I think it'll be a good learning opportunity for everyone. So take it away, Carter. Just assume our listeners haven't read the article.
Yeah.
And describe it.
Great. Yeah. So Brennan has an article titled College Admission Maxing, a Troubling Trend, right? And he kind of initially starts off talking about different types of maxing that are trendy right now: looks maxing, protein maxing, etc., and puts them under the umbrella of a culture of optimization that he then applies to the college admissions process, right? And says applicants mistakenly believe that they need to do everything and be everything to be admitted to college, right? And blames like institutional journalism, social media, independent consultants as all sort of contributing to this culture of anxiety, and then says the reality is that college admission can be joyful, simple, and fulfilling, a celebration of one's strengths and values as they are, and not how society tells them they should be. In truth, admission professionals are not seeking flawless, excessive resumes from superhuman applicants. In fact, these applications often land as inauthentic and induce eye-rolling from those reviewing them. Rather, colleges are hoping to admit students who have found meaning in what they do and are ready to engage and contribute to a vibrant campus community. Yet increasingly, young people are application maxing, right? And he describes this as trying to optimize their application, right? Maximizing their extracurriculars, looking for impressive internships, feeling a need to publish research. And then he sees the other side of that, the process also building the list as an opportunity for admissions maxing, as he describes it, right? Building lists that often exceed 20 schools or more, and sort of decries both of these different ways to approach, the college admissions process from the student angle, and then goes on to interview several, admissions deans and give advice for how students can approach the process a little bit differently. And, ultimately, I take issue with this approach of sort of ascribing student anxiety to a trend, right? To this culture of optimization, as he talks about it. I think we share the same goals. Right? We all want this process to ideally be joyful and fulfilling. And I mean, I would add simple to that, but that to me just feels like ridiculous at this point. It's not simple, obviously. And I think when we talk about it as joyful and fulfilling, we're describing ultimately a fantasy. This is what we wish it were, and this is part of why we're in this podcast community that you've brought together, Mark, is because we want to offer help to students and families on how to make this as joyful and as fulfilling as possible. But the idea that students should just not worry as much about where they're going to end up, or, just don't take that extra AP class because, colleges claim that they don't actually want to see that. I think that that's disingenuous. I really do. And I think that when people experiencing this process here, professionals and adults, be so dismissive of their very real fears and anxieties that ultimately it lands on deaf ears. The professionals come across as out of touch with what the student reality and experience actually is. I was so moved on episode 663 of the podcast when you referenced the challenge success, survey that came out of thousands of American high schoolers saying that
43,000. Yeah.
43,000, saying that 2/3 of them are always worried about college, right? And I think you very rightly asked, what are we doing here? Right. After hearing that, I found a study from NYU from before COVID saying that half of students were anxious about college. And, I think it's clear that we're moving in the wrong direction, right? More anxiety is happening. And that's not because of social media or, headlines out there. I think that we really have to take a serious look at the incentives that these students have, at the messages that they're getting from everyone in this field about how to go about this process, and to look at what's actually being rewarded in the process. Because I guess at the end of the day, I try to approach the practice of college counseling
Mm-hmm.
with empathy and with curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that means that empathizing with these students does not necessarily mean validating the intense anxiety and fear that they have, but it
Mm-hmm.
means understanding it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Understanding where they're coming from and why, and saying, what you feel is real,
Mm-hmm.
and here's what we can do about it. If I went into a college counseling meeting and a student is coming into it wanting so badly to go to a prestigious school for a variety of different reasons,
Mm-hmm.
and I tell them, listen, you shouldn't be worried about that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're not going to listen to me.
Right.
Right. And so if we want to actually do something about this mental health crisis that our
Mm-hmm.
adolescents are facing, we have to respect the experience that they're having. We have to recognize that it's different from the experience that we had. It's different from the experience that we wish that they had. And that it is something that we can change. It doesn't have to be like this. I don't know. What do you think?
You make a lot of good points. That wasn't the core of how I interpreted the article. So this is a great conversation. Let's talk about it. I felt the biggest points of emphasis were don't follow the herd, like individualize this process for yourself, be authentic. And there is an aspect of authenticity when done well that can land well in the admission process. And another focal point I felt was stop obsessing over perfection. Those to me were like the core things I took away from it. I do think your point about meeting people where they are is important. I think your point about being empathetic is important. I think your point about if people feel like we're just dismissing their anxieties as you shouldn't feel that way, they're not going to listen. I think all those things are very important. And I see how those could be extrapolated from the message, the way it was communicated. I didn't feel like that was the core of the message. I felt like the core of the message was like, you can have a positive experience without feeling like you need to do more and more and more and more and more. Like, in other words, an example that I felt Brennan could have used, but he didn't, was you're trying to be the valedictorian and you've heard that someone taking 14 APs and now you feel you need to do 15 or 16. And some of that, he's trying to rein that in. And like, I think of, I'll tell you a couple of stories, and I believe I might have shared these at some point on the podcast, so they might be old stories. Sometimes one was a student I worked with at an independent school who said to me, I just hate the college process. It just beats you down. To which I said, well, it doesn't have to beat you down. And to which she said, yes, it does. And I mean, everything ended up working out for her, everything, smooth. Another student I think of who, and this was always one really stood out to me because I just had a meeting with someone who was at a different independent school in Florida who had a transcript that looked like perfection. Like, as far as when we talk about applications, we talk about data and voice, kind of borrowed that from Lee Coffin. Data and voice. Data is all your stats, whether it's test scores or APs or rigor, and grades. Obviously, everything looked kind of strong there, right? Like high 1500s, all the fives, all that stuff, all the rigor, and initially did not get into Georgetown restrictive early action initially. Eventually did get it. The student was really stressed. And then I was having a conversation not too long after that. It was a few months, but it felt close to me, with his other student who had a GPA under 3, 2.7, 2.8. And she was saying to me, it just feels good how all these schools just are just after me. And I'm just feeling so loved. I'm feeling so loved. It just feels so great to be so courted by them. And so I thought, like, okay, what was the difference? Well, one of the differences was they obviously had different college lists and they had different expectations. So I think you're always going to judge this process based on what your expectations are. So if your mindset is, I have this T10 mindset, it's like Ivies and a couple Ivy peers, there's a good chance you're going to be thinking the way Brennan was sort of challenging people not to think. I know I work really, really, really hard at getting people to realize there's more than 10 good schools, there's more than 20 good schools, and there's lots of tools and things you do to do that. Sometimes you're more successful than others, but when you're able to do it, it's just like the stress, so much of the stress comes out of the process for kids. And I have seen, look, it's never going to be simple. Like you said, it's not going to be simple. But I would say there's a lot of people that would say the college process was confidence enhancing, not confidence debilitating, which is always my goal, because I always want people to feel better about who they are, because I think self-confidence is extremely important. And so it takes some work to get there, and because so a lot of times it's a lot of work to reframe expectations.
Yeah.
But then when you get there, then they can feel really great. And so I'd love some feedback, Carter, because, I was talking to one of our good friends and the co-host that's on, on sabbatical right now, Julia Escobar. I was thinking a lot of ways I feel like you're somewhat like the male conscience of our podcast, and Susan's like the female conscience of our podcast. Like you're always thinking of student health and what's wrong. But tell me, we're both reasonable people.
Yeah.
Maybe I read it twice. You read it a couple times. Do you think that I'm characterizing things? What are your thoughts?
So I think that, when you talk about the T10, T20 mentality,
yes,
even when you get outside of that, it is still, it's often, I think students experience this as a brutal process.
Correct.
Right? There are 34, I think, colleges and universities with single digit admit rates right now. And so
you're absolutely right to say that it's not only T10 or T20 that can be incredibly stressful and incredibly hard to get in, and you could do all the right things and not feel like you got the results that you wanted.
Yeah. And that's I think the idea, I agree with you. I think I work hard. The team at Marymount, not just the college counselors, the faculty, the administrators, everybody works so hard to try to get to help these teenagers emerge from this process with their identity, sense of identity and confidence intact. And it's a lot of work. So that's first why I would say that we cannot characterize this process as simple anymore.
Agreed.
It's a lot of work to do in a healthy way. But I think, because students have goals, whether that goal doesn't have to be a T10 or T20. And I really respect when students and families are not laser focused on that, though I understand why they would be.
Right.
But even when you're, laser focused on liberal arts colleges or public flagships, whatever it is, the anxiety is still there because the process is so obscured to students and families. They have no idea how these decisions get made, and they do see their friends and relatives and their peers on and off social media getting decisions that make no sense to them, right? And I think we in the field, we have experience in this. We do this all the time. It can make sense to us.
Well, there was a good quote from Tony from Colorado College. I mean, I didn't agree with everything that he said in his portion, because he was advocating for, you shouldn't be applying to 20, you should apply to 10. And I know you and I are going to do a YouTube video on that. So I'll save a lot of thoughts I have on that over there. But he does make a quote. He does have a quote in the article. So here's what he says. He's talking about students. He said, "This can be challenging because admissions decisions seem more random and erratic to them." So, so where he goes with that is a little different, but that's absolutely true, right? Like we always say in admissions that admissions decisions are very intentional, but they feel random because lots of reasons. One, on the outside, people don't know what the institutional priorities are. They also don't know what the pool looks like. So it's so I agree with you. It feels obscure. And I also agree with you that there's a lot of colleges, quite honestly, that are really hard to get into, because the reality is, there's not a lot when you look at the percentage of the 2,275, but as someone once said, all the ones people really want to go to are hard. So, you can take the majority of those 2,275, and especially if it is an upper middle class kid or a private school kid, they're aspiring to maybe 100 of that group pretty frequently, depending on, where they are. So that does make it hard because the reality is, if it's a private school, we've talked about this before. We did a whole YouTube video on it. It's going to be very disparate admit rates between RD and ED, and you can't ED everywhere. And then there's a sizable chunk of public flagship schools, especially a lot of the popular ones, really tough out of state.
Yeah.
And even schools that people might not think of, like when people think of really hard to get in schools out of state, they'll think of schools like Georgia Tech and UT Austin and UNC and UVA, and they'll think of like Berkeley and UCLA and Michigan. But then think about like UW Comp Sci, University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, like just out of state geese schools, not that easy to admit, University of Colorado Aerospace Engineering. I mean, Clemson's I got the Clemson interview this week with their chief enrollment officer. So Clemson's on my mind.
Yeah.
Clemson is really differentiating between in-state, out-of-state in a way that they weren't even 2 years ago. And I mean, Florida State, like Georgia, these are not easy schools. Even in-state Virginia for certain engineering. So there's a pretty, I don't want to hijack the conversation, but there's a pretty long list of schools that are pretty tough to get into. So I think that's the reality. And I think one thing as I think about it, probably one thing I would agree with you, the article probably could have addressed, like it's not as simple as just saying reframe your perspective. Like when you think of, that's part of what is implicit in your message. Like when you combined social media, peers, parents, everything coming at you. I'm not saying, and I know Brennan, and so I think I can say with confidence if he was here, he probably would say, yeah, I don't think it's simple either. But the article gave the impression, or I see how it could have given the impression that like just reframe your mindset and things will be a lot simpler if you can reframe your mindset. And even that I do work very, very hard on that, and I kind of agree with it as a goal, and I feel like I see a lot of success with it. It's incredibly hard, and I've been doing this a while, and I'm meeting like with people multiple, like it sometimes takes me a year and a half with somebody to actually get them there. So if you think of that in the context of like the average person who's doing this on their own, I think that's probably some of what you're saying. Like I feel it could smack as an unrealistic ask. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's definitely where I'm coming from with this. And I think that I think that the work that we do in our actual practice, in the making of the podcast, and all of that is important to help empower people to navigate this system in a way that is healthier than what a lot of people do right now. But I think that if we're serious about mental health, that this can't be the best advice we have to offer to students and families, that we actually need as a field to take some steps in thinking through what we might be able to do to structurally change this process that can actually support student growth and development. And when you're talking about the schools that students that high achieving students are aiming for, it's not all 2,275. And people might say like, oh, just change your expectations, as if it's that easy. But again, on your recent audio podcast episode, you've had a series of helping parents understand how to basically become forensic accountants in order to determine whether a school that they're going to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in or take on hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt is actually going to survive, is going to be a worthwhile investment. And so you're saying to students, oh, don't worry about these places that feel impossible to get into. You can go somewhere that might shut down in a few years, right? Like this is not a choice to many people, right? Many people feel that not only is their college like an existential identity marker for them moving forward in their lives, which again, I think is a valid feeling on their part, but they also feel like it's an economic necessity for them in the future. You look across the country at how many downwardly mobile college graduates there are in their 20s and 30s. And I think it's easy to understand why people feel so much anxiety around getting into the quote unquote right college. Like we know that so many colleges can be so rewarding in so many ways, but I understand why students and families may not feel that way or may not necessarily see that. And that honestly, I don't know if the picture is as rosy as we wish that it were. because things have
but
changed.
it's also first of all, going to a selective school is not a panacea. It's just not.
Definitely.
And the path that you take to try to get into one, depending on what your expectations are, can be incredibly fraught with high risk that could lead to way more stress if you don't reframe. So, like, if you're really looking at getting a good job, like, go be a nurse. Like, I mean, I'm not saying everybody's supposed to be a nurse, but the point I'm making is job security is much more correlated by you targeting something where there's a demand than it is going to a highly selective college. So I just want to push back a bit on, like, your key to job security is to go to a highly selective school that may not close. Like, I get that's the feeling there, and I get that's the feeling, but I do think we have to push back on that. I mean, I'll tell you something. I have worked with quite a few kids at Phillips Exeter, which is one of the most prestigious boarding schools in the country. And so many of them are dissatisfied with their college options. They thought, I went to Phillips Exeter. Like, all of a sudden, like, it comes with an expectation of, I'm going to a certain kind of school. And so, like, I don't want that to be the solution either. That, like, you just validate, like, that's not the solution, is just validate what people's preconceived fears are. And because a lot of times that doesn't work out even if they get it. Even if they get it. And so I think that's important. That's part of what I think, Brennan's trying to address, like, this whole thing of, I got to do more research. I got, like, you oftentimes hear me talk about that. I got to start my charity. I got to start my nonprofit. I got to get published. I got to do all these things thinking that that's the solution to everything. And so, and that a lot of times that does add to the stress because it is a little bit of a keeping up with the Joneses mindset. So I know Brennan enough to know that I would go so far as to say Brennan cares about mental health as much as you and I do, because I've known him since 2003. And so I know that it's not, mental health doesn't matter at all. If anything, I actually think he's kind of arguing for mental health.
Sure. Yeah, I see it.
All right, friends, that concludes part 1 of my conversation with Carter. Hope you join us next week for part 2 of the Great Debate. All right, friends, before we get to our interview with Rick Barth, we had one of our very dedicated members of our listening family send in a message. In fact, this mom who sent in this message, this mom actually hosted the reception I did in Central Texas back in April of 2025. And so it's a special person, but I want to play this message that she sent in because you all are special people. And I want you to see how sometimes when you guys call in and you leave a message, I want you to see, like, the impact that it can have on our other listeners. So take a listen to this message from this mom from Texas.
Hi, Mark and the whole team. This is a mom from Texas. I'm the one who wrote in a while back with the question about how to help me with my daughter who is not excited to go to college. And you did a great episode with Chris Tier, and I just wanted to thank you for that and for your helpful responses. But also, just recently, another mom called in on SpeakPipe and gave some more advice and answers to my question. And I wanted to thank her especially because her advice was on target for what my daughter needed to hear. And as I was driving her 12 hours away this week to drop her off, I reminded her that she has all the tools within her from everything she's done in the past, that she has the tools within her to be equipped to do what she needs. And even though she's scared and even though she's nervous, she has it. And that was just really what she needed to hear. Because that mom was right. I can't promise her that everything's going to be okay. I can't promise her really anything that will happen. So anyway, I just wanted to thank that mom so much for her great advice. It was very timely for me and my daughter. And Mark, just thank you for all that you do for this whole community. We benefit so much from it. Thank you.
All right, friends, I've talked enough about my interview with Rick Barth. Let's transition now and hear Director of Admission Rick Barth, Clemson University. All things Clemson.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, in part 1 of my interview with Rick Barth, Rick shares his backstory. Rick mentions several reasons why students should consider Clemson, and he mentions some of Clemson's marquee programs. Rick explains how Clemson admits by major. Rick explains how the undeclared, undecided major works at Clemson. Rick opens up and shares the most competitive majors at Clemson. And Rick often refers to these majors as limited enrollment majors. Rick shares the number of growth of Clemson's applications and explains why he feels Clemson has taken off since 2020. Finally, Rick talks about the Clemson Alumni Network. Listen and enjoy. Friends, I'm here with Rick Barth, and he is the Director of Undergraduate Admissions at Clemson University. And we're going to learn all things Clemson today. Welcome to the Your College Bound Kid podcast, Rick.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate the invitation, and it's great to be here.
I really enjoyed our pre-meeting and just talking with you. And I kind of loved your transparency. I don't always get transparency, especially from public schools, which seem to have a lot more eyes on them. And so I kind of loved it, how you kind of kept it real. And I think our listeners are going to learn a lot today. But
Excellent.
let's start by your background. I know you've worked in a few places. I find our listeners always love learning the context in which you're going to speak today.
Yeah, Mark, I started my career in, I guess, what you would call the traditional student affairs path. Things like working in housing and residential life, orientation, judicial, ended up being the Dean of Students after I finished my doctorate at the University of Florida. I was Dean of Students at the University of West Florida. Hurricane Ivan came in, hit the Gulf Coast, shut the school down for 3 weeks, and they asked me to be director of admissions, and that started my path down admissions. And on the enrollment side, I've worked at a number of different places. Obviously, I'm at Clemson right now. I've worked at the University of Alabama. I've worked at Montevallo, small school south of Birmingham, Alabama, and so a number of places. But I can say without a doubt, Clemson has been the best place that I've worked.
Love it, love it, love it. And we're going to talk with Rick about a number of things. We're going to talk about Clemson and its distinctives. We're going to talk about their honors college, which is highly renowned and has some different approaches in their admission process. So let's, I kind of love asking this question. Sometimes I have this little sadistic grin inside my head, but I like to ask admission officers why Clemson, because so many schools ask our students that question. So I like to reverse it. Rick, why Clemson?
What I like about Clemson is it truly takes a philosophy which is unique because although we admit by major, our colleges challenge our students to not tell us what you want to major in, but tell us what you want to do. And I think that's unique. And you see that in our two largest colleges, our College of Engineering. While you will pick one of the 10 engineering degrees, they work with you the first year in general engineering to see what you truly want to do with that degree. It's the type of research you'll do with your faculty member, the type of showcasing of opportunities the college is going to give you, and then you really go into your major courses your sophomore year. College of Business does the same thing. You say you want to be accounting. Are you sure you want to be an accountant? So they work with you on the first year to make sure that that's truly what you want to do. So I love that philosophy of don't tell me what you want to major in, although we require that on the application, but tell us what you want to do. And they really work with our students to build those type of programs out. Like many universities, we have living learning centers where students live in the halls with certain cohorts. They'll take some of their core classes in the halls. I think that's important that students look at that regardless of what university they go to. And I think another unique difference for Clemson is truly the care that our faculty and staff have for their students. And I know everybody says that, but I'm going to give you some examples. Our Student Accessibility Services Director, Margaret Camp, is amazing. Margaret will appear anywhere on campus. She will present on our students anywhere you ask her to do. She'll present on the law. She has been vital to us as far as training our staff, and she truly cares about the students. And what I love about our Student Accessibility Services is they don't just work with students on the accommodations. They work with students to making sure their students that are registered with them are tied into all academic support programs across campus, not just the services provided by Student Accessibility Services. Our Center for Career and Professional Development, Dr. Neil Burton, the same thing. You see Neil everywhere on campus. And I've not experienced that with Director of Career Centers before. And he really works with students to get them engaged from the moment they get on campus to the time they graduate, not just on the career development, but, into the development of what's your interest. What is it you want to do with your life? What's the impact you can have by the things you're doing here at Clemson? And I think that is critically important. One of my favorite stories when I knew Clemson was different, January, the beginning of the semester, 2 years ago, I had to park behind the College of Business. So I walked through the College of Business to get to the building that my office was in at the time. And there are faculty and staff at the doors of the building, and they're asking every student, and this is January start. It doesn't matter if you're a first-year student, returning student, they're asking every student, what classroom are you looking for? Our faculty and staff in our College of Business were out there working all the entrances of the building, working with every student to make sure they were not lost on that first day of class. And when you talk about the Clemson family, every school says that. But I think that is truly what is meant by the Clemson family. And I think where we see this, Mark, our 4-year graduation rate is over 70%. Our 5-year graduation rate's around 84%. And our 6-year graduation rate is bouncing up against 90%. A lot of times families don't realize how powerful those numbers are. I know you do. And those are significantly higher than the national averages for each of those categories. So I truly think it's that philosophy of don't tell me what you want to major in, tell me what you want to do. It's the people that run our programs that make a difference. It's the type of that support you see from faculty in our College of Business. And that is that true sense that our current students, our alumni, our faculty and staff truly do view Clemson as a family. And I do think you see that in our student success metrics.
I didn't tell you this when we met earlier, but I've been to Clemson 3 times in the last 3 years. And it's partly easy for me because I'm in Atlanta and both my daughters are Raleigh-Durham. So I'm shooting right past it. And so it's kind of easy for me to make plans to stop off. But a couple times I stayed right there in hotels in Clemson so I could kind of explore a lot more. Students were very friendly. They were very, very friendly. One thing I love that you guys do, I wish more colleges did this. You encourage people after the tour to come back to admissions if you have any questions. And I spent 45 minutes just talking with some of that. Sometimes I plan these meetings in advance. This was not one of those times. And, it's just really good opportunity. You've seen the school, you've walked around, talked to students, and now you get a chance to sit down and kind of get your questions answered. And so,
Yeah. And, a lot of times families will ask to meet with me. And if I'm here, that's fine. But I often say to them, you're going to get much better information from one of my counselors that do this every day than you're going to get from me.
Yeah.
So I hope you had a positive experience with the person you met with, but we tried
had a very positive experience, and I had a very for me, I work with so many different kinds of kids. So it's what I like is when I feel like I really got the institution, so that now I know the right student to recommend, and that's that was really clear. Now you didn't mention the Academic Success Center, ASC, because I always think of that as like one of your stronger programs. Is that?
It is. And that's that's what I appreciate about Margaret and her team and Student Accessibility Services. They tie their students into that. A lot of time, we are attracting very high caliber students these days. So often they think they do not need that type of support, but that is an outstanding academic support program. Our counseling services are outstanding. And, everybody thinks, not everybody, but sometimes people think, Clemson is growing at the same rate of some of the other public large institutions, and we're not. We cap our growth at 2%. And so we're not trying to bring in an incoming class of 7,000 or 8,000 or 9,000 or 10,000 like some of our peer institutions are trying to do right now. So that helps us with the academic support services. That helps us with the counseling services. That helps us with accessibility services. That helps us with career development, because we are staying small enough that we do have the resources to truly get students in and help them. And I do think that's important.
Let's go back to the statement you made, we do admit by major, but, because I find it's one of the more complicated parts of admissions to explain to students, because some schools have what they call an open door policy, and they kind of just admit you into the whole, like the UGA, for example, right? They just admit you into the whole college. And then you have other schools all the way on the other extreme that every single major has its own different admit rate. And then you have places that admit into the college or the school, but then you can move around within the school as much as you want. And then you have colleges that admit into the school, but have a couple of really, really selective programs that for those really selective programs, they're admitting into the major. And then you have some that admitted to the whole school, but you still have to get accepted into the program once you're at the school. versus you just declare, like it's kind of a lot to unpack. So where would you say Clemson is from a separate, admit rate for every major to, admitting into the school and then pick your major? Like just unpack it for us.
Sure. It is a different admit rate for each major. When we say we admit by major, that is true for the majority of students. We do have an undecided option on the application. So if students do not know what they want to major in, they can declare that. So I don't want to scare anyone off thinking they have to know what they want to major in, because within our majors, within the application, there is an undecided option, undeclared option a student can select. For most of our programs, you do put down, or on the application, you put down your first choice major and your second choice major. So if you were to put nursing as your first choice and engineering as your second choice, that selectivity for those two majors is very different, because nursing is going to bring in a cohort of under 200 students. But to your earlier point, it is direct to nursing. So once you get admitted to nursing, you are in nursing. You don't have to then reapply as an upper division student like you do at many nursing programs. And so that acceptance rate for nursing, because of that smaller cohort, whereas engineering is going to want to bring in 1,100, 1,200 students every fall, that selectivity is going to be different. So I know that does get confusing for families. And Mark, I'll often get the question, not really from a student, more from a mom or a dad, should my student put on their application a less selective and less competitive major to have a better chance of being admitted? And I know that kind of seems like a really smart idea, but we want students to be what they want to be. If you want to be a nurse and you do not get into nursing at Clemson, but you get into nursing somewhere else and you truly want to be a nurse, I want you to go be a nurse. And so I don't think gaming the application is really smart, because I think that creates problems down the road. So getting back to the core point of your question, we do admit by major. So there is a different acceptance rate. The way you phrased it was a good way of phrasing it. For every major, that's based on the size of the incoming class that program wants. And they meet with us every fall to set the next fall's targets. And then there is movement. There's movement among the colleges. Engineering and business, like I say, even encourage that. They want you to explore your first year and then really go into your major courses your second year. For our high demand majors, things such as nursing, architecture, landscape architecture, sports communication, and so forth, can you change your major into these limited space programs? You can, but it's not a guarantee. So, the end of your first year, if you decide you want to be a nurse, they may allow 10 or 11 students to change their majors at that point and come into nursing. But who is to say you're going to be among that smaller group that they're going to allow that to happen? Now, for some of our larger majors, we're just like any other institution. It's very easy to change your major once you get here. It's just really kind of talking to your academic advisor, or before you're admitted, talking to my team about what are those limited majors, just to make sure you have the most information you can have as you decide to come to Clemson or apply to Clemson for a certain major.
So let's talk about the undeclared path, because that's someone who hasn't picked a major. So what's the process of them getting admitted into their major if they come in through the undeclared, undecided path? What does that look like for them?
They will come in as undecided, and they will have an academic advisor that will start working with them even before they get to campus, through the orientation process. And so they will engage with that conversation with that academic advisor about where their interests are. If their interests, are strongly in an area such as engineering or business, they will probably go ahead and encourage them to change their major into one of those programs, since they're going to work with them on their interest. If not, they're going to encourage them to meet with the counseling staff at the Career Center to kind of do some of the tools and inventories they have to work with them as far as where their interests lie. And then, by the beginning of the sophomore year, they're really going to be encouraged to declare a major. They have not declared a major by the second semester of their sophomore year. That indicates, our data indicates, their chance of progressing quickly and graduating in a time that is healthy for them, starts going the other direction. So there's going to be a lot more pressure at that point to make that major decision. So there is support, there is guidance, there is academic advising, but the sooner a student can declare a major, the better their chances of graduating. And so it is important to us to provide the support, but also provide it in a way that they can make a timely decision.
But is it declaring or is it getting admitted into? And the reason why I say that is because you're right. Students and parents, they're looking at this process from the standpoint, what gives me my best odds if I like a school? So if they hear that there's a different admit rate for different majors, but if I go undecided as a major, all I have to do is declare, then that's going to be really appealing to them because they're like, okay, I'm not subject to the harder scrutiny of getting into a tougher major. I just come in undeclared and then pick my major. So is it declared or is it get admitted into because we reviewed your transcripts and you look like you're a good fit to do mechanical engineering? And I just mentioned that because I know that's one of your strongest programs.
Yeah, it's a good point. So for our limited majors, again, those programs, such as nursing, architecture, landscape architecture, sports communication, graphic design. For our smaller programs, there is no guarantee that undecided students will be able to go into those programs. The vast majority, all the programs in the College of Agriculture, Forestry, and Life Sciences, most of the programs in College of Arts and Humanities, probably all of those, all the programs in engineering, all the programs, in business, all the programs in College of Education, I'm looking at them now, all the programs in College of Science, they're going to be able to transfer into those majors or change into those majors. So if they have an interest in nursing, if they have an interest in architecture, if they have an interest in landscape architecture, if they have an interest in sports communication, they need to declare those, whichever one of those they have an interest in, even if they're not 100% sure, they need to put that as their top major. And then they can put undecided as their second choice major. And that can help them in two ways. It allows them to go into that program if they're admitted to that program, as you're pointing out, or if they are not at the level to be admissible to that program and they are admitted on their second major, and it's more important to be at Clemson than to get in that first major, then they have the opportunity to come and really explore the other programs that they can graduate in. To answer your question directly, though, there's no advantage to coming in undecided.
You're reinforcing something and you're bringing back memories from my time at Clemson and sitting down. I remember being surprised because for so many schools, business and engineering are like the toughest ways to get in. And then I'm sitting here at Clemson and they're telling me sports communications and the other programs are tough. But one of the ways they explained it to me is that a lot of the recruited athletes do sports communications, and there's not that big of a department, so it gobbles up a lot of the spots. Is that fair to say?
I don't think that's accurate. No.
Okay.
You need, our average, our median SAT scores like a 1400, a 31, equivalent ACT and so forth. And, our enrolled median's a 1350 and a 29. And you've got to be at that ballpark or higher to get into sports comm. So I'm not sure who told you that. I'm sorry they told you that.
It was, so that's why you're here to correct it.
But that is, that's not really an accurate statement. I'm not saying that we don't have student athletes that get into limited programs. We have some very smart, very, very achieved student athletes, but I'm not aware of any major that the majority of students are student athletes in that are taking up space from other students. So,
Rick, what year did you get to Clemson?
I started I believe it was September 15th of 2022. So I'm finishing up my fourth cycle.
So you probably are right in that place where you've seen growth in Clemson's applicant pool, but quite a bit. But it felt like it started sometime around there. That I've told people before, I've had more students interested in Clemson in the last 2 years than the previous 20. And it felt like it was kind of around. Maybe it's you. Maybe it's your magic because that's around when it felt like Clemson started taking off to me. But talk about the out-of-state growth in your applicant pool. Because I see that all the time. I work with a national company. We work with students from 30 states. So I see the interest, especially I'd say from the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast, that I never saw before. And what do you attribute? I know you see it. You probably have some numbers to back it up. And what do you attribute it to?
Mark, the first point is, my supervisor, our AVP of enrollment, David Kakowski, is just outstanding. I've always said, David here at Clemson and Carrie Aldridge at Tennessee are just both the most amazing enrollment officers I've ever seen. They're the top of their game. And I've been fortunate enough to work with David David got here about 2017, 2018. Applications were at 28,000, 845, and we're at 66,500 now.
More than double. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so, he brought Common App, he brought a stronger CRM as far as Slate and so forth, and got the right people in the right seats.
Mm-hmm.
And David is just he's very insightful. He cares deeply about students in the school. He works very hard. So he makes sure he is very careful in who he hires for key positions. And so I think there was a combination of the work that David did. There was the energy that students had coming out of COVID, of wanting to travel and wanting to go further away from home. So, you look at that fall of 2020, Clemson was at 28,596. As I mentioned, we're now at 66,500. The biggest jump was that 20 to 21, 47,069. So I think it was a combination of David coming in and modernizing the admissions office, and then the energy that students had coming out of COVID. I really think those were the two things. And then, as you've mentioned, when you get to this campus, you just feel really good. I mean, that's what got me here. I had the same experience a student had. When I interviewed, I did the tour. I was laughing and joking. People were nice. This campus has a great feel. You can feel the energy of our students. You can tell our energy, our students love it here. So part of those numbers are students going back into their communities and talking about their experiences. And that's been a big part of this growth, because we are outgunned when it comes to the number of positions. I have 12 recruiters compared to some of, other places I've worked where I had 38 out-of-state recruiters alone.
Sounds like Alabama right there.
Yes. So I do think that's a big part of our success. And everybody says they have a great alumni network. Clemson has an amazing alumni network. Our Board of Visitors is one of our alumni groups, and their individuals, majority are alumni, but they also give back to the university in a number of ways. I cannot tell you how many Board of Visitor members call me on my cell phone every year to tell me about students. And it's nothing I've experienced anywhere else as far as the volume of our alumni caring about the school, reaching out in their home communities, encouraging students to reach out to us and us to reach out to students. So I do think there's a number of inputs on this, but I do think those are some of the key ones.
Friends, this concludes this part of our interview with Rick Barth, Director of Admission at Clemson University. We hope you join us in our next episode for the next part. All right, friends, what are you going to have next week? It's pretty simple. You're going to have part 2 of Carter and I debating the article Brennan Barnard wrote in Forbes. And then you're going to have part 2 of my interview with Rick Barth, Director of Undergraduate Admissions, Clemson University. And friends, never forget, hard work beats talent when talent refuses to work hard. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us, and you will get every single episode as soon as they are released. If you want to support our podcast, you can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can say positive things about YCBK on social media. And you help us stay commercial-free and pay our staff by donating at yourcollegeboundkid.com and clicking the donate button. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. If you have a question or suggestion, just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK, hit the orange button, and speak, and we will do our best to get your question or your comment in your own voice on an upcoming episode. I'm the producer of the podcast, and I live in Metro Atlanta. We have a fantastic team that has over 200 years of admission and counseling experience. Shout out to our co-hosts, Susan Tree in Pennsylvania, Lisa Ruff in North Carolina, 2 admission officers from Colorado, Hillary Dickman from Colorado College, Kate Strickland from CU Boulder, Vince Garcia in California, Julia Esquivel in Massachusetts, Linda Depker in Missouri, Andy Strickler, the Chief Enrollment Officer at Connecticut College, Heath Einstein, the Chief Enrollment Officer at TCU in Fort Worth, Carter DeLauro, a co-director of college counseling in New York, and Christina Lopez, the former Dean of Admission at Barnard College, and our international college specialist, Kevin Newton from Dallas, Texas. Our stupendous sound engineer who makes everything happen is Nemanja Matvic from Serbia. Our reliable webmaster is John Rooney. Website updates are done by Joy Stucker. Image editing by Vlad Honchar. And what would we do without our volunteers? Guy Pillsbury, Sony Patel, and Andy Bernstein are all helping us with podcast marketing. Carolyn Wood, Mark Doniger, and Carrie Roberts book interviews with thought leaders. Amanda Dugan, Colleen Sinoki, Nicole Resch, Trevor Smith, Ryan Stepler, and Lynn Labash send thank yous to interviewees. If you want a coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you want to reach someone else on our team, all of our bios with contact info can be found at yourcosbrownkid.com under the About YCBK tab. If you want to get our free monthly newsletter, YCBK Plus, it's also under the About YCBK tab. If you want to see our recommended books and websites, they are on our website under the Resources tab. While you're on our website, check out our hundreds of interviews in their entirety. Check out our college spotlights and our upcoming events and receptions. And you can now do searches for past content by using our new Explore and Topics tabs. We really encourage you to explore our past content. We have close to 1,000 hours. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting with you every single Monday and every single Thursday.